Have you ever wondered if the human mind can be a doorway to something beyond our understanding? For Dr. Viktor Lacerda, a celebrated psychiatrist, everything was grounded in science, until the day he met Lucas. Lucas wasn't an ordinary patient. Diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, he exhibited something far more disturbing. Each of his personalities seemed to carry memories not of this world, as if they were echoes of lives torn apart by a dark force. What Viktor initially dismissed as mere delusions soon turned into an obsession that would unravel his grasp on reality. The scene opens with Viktor in his dimly lit office at Ravenswood Psychiatric Institute, surrounded by shelves crammed with psychology textbooks and files. A thunderstorm rages outside, casting fleeting shadows across the room as he reviews Lucas's case. The file contains strange drawings made during their first sessions, images of an indistinct figure cloaked in shadow, always looming at the edge of each scene. A faint knock on his office door breaks the tense silence, and Viktor turns to see Lucas, a pale, wiry young man, standing in the doorway. His eyes are bloodshot, and his trembling hands clutch a notebook. "They're here," Lucas whispers. "They always come when I sleep." From the very first session, something about Lucas unsettled Viktor. His other patients spoke of traumas or anxieties, but Lucas's personality spoke of battles in trenches long forgotten, of burning at the stake in medieval times, of drowning in waters so cold that it felt like death itself had frozen. As Lucas described these vivid memories, his voice and mannerisms changed entirely. His tone shifted, his accent morphed, and his eyes seemed to darken, like he was staring into another world. Each time, he mentioned a figure he called the witness, someone, or something, that he claimed watched all these events unfold. As Viktor listens, a chill creeps down his spine. He begins to notice things he can't explain. The air in the room growing colder as Lucas speaks, the faint smell of burning wood when Lucas talks about the stake, and the sound of faint whispers that seem to echo from the corners of the room. At first, Viktor attributes these sensations to fatigue or overwork. But one particular moment changes everything. During a session, Lucas's voice deepens unnaturally as he describes a figure in a forest. "It was watching me. It had no face, but I could feel its eyes, cold, hollow eyes. It whispered my name." Suddenly, the lights flicker, and the recording equipment in the room shuts off. Lucas freezes mid-sentence, his gaze locked on something behind Viktor. "It's here," he says in a voice not his own. Viktor turns, heart pounding, but sees only the empty room, bathed in eerie fluorescent light. The experience shakes Viktor, but instead of retreating, his curiosity deepens. He decides to explore the phenomenon further, believing he can uncover a psychological explanation. Yet, as he delves deeper into Lucas's fragmented psyche, Viktor begins to feel the weight of something intangible pressing on him. He finds himself waking up at night in a cold sweat, the sound of whispers echoing in his ears, though no one is around. Shadows seem to move just out of his line of sight, and for the first time in his career, Viktor begins to question if he's the one losing his grip on reality. The story begins on a stormy night. Dr. Viktor Lacerda finds himself pacing his office, reviewing the unsettling recordings from Lucas's latest session. The wind howls outside, shaking the old windows of Ravenswood Psychiatric Institute. On the desk, a flickering lamp casts long, jittering shadows, giving the impression that something unseen is moving just beyond the room. Viktor rewinds the tape, focusing on a particular moment where Lucas's voice changes, deep, guttural, and completely unrecognizable. "You're not safe," the voice growls. Viktor pauses, the static from the tape suddenly feeling louder, oppressive. He shivers, but tells himself it's just fatigue. That night, Viktor's sleep is restless. He dreams of standing in a dense forest under a blood-red sky. The trees are twisted and bare, their skeletal branches clawing at the heavens. In the distance, a faint hum echoes, a sound so low it feels like it vibrates in his chest. The hum transforms into whispers, indistinct yet deafening, as though 100 voices are speaking all at once. Viktor turns, searching for the source, but all he sees is the silhouette of a figure, tall and thin, standing between the trees. Its outline wavers, like smoke caught in a draft. As Viktor moves closer, the whispers grow louder, almost forming words. Suddenly, the figure snaps its head toward him, though it has no discernible face. Viktor's breath catches in his throat as a piercing cold envelopes him. The figure raises a hand, its fingers unnaturally long and sharp, and points directly at him. A single word rings out in a voice that shakes the ground beneath his feet: "Witness." Viktor jolts awake, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding against his ribs like a caged animal. The morning light does little to chase away the unease. Viktor arrives at Ravenswood earlier than usual, clutching a steaming cup of coffee to steady his nerves. He convinces himself it was just a dream, a byproduct of his intense sessions with Lucas. Yet, as he walks into his office, he notices something strange. The notebook Lucas had left during their last session is open on his desk. He distinctly remembers locking it away in the drawer the night before. The pages are filled with frantic sketches of the forest, the figure, and what looks like a distorted face staring out from a tangle of shadows. Viktor flips through the notebook, and his stomach sinks. Among the drawings are phrases scrawled in red ink. It watches. We are not alone, and your time is coming. The handwriting is erratic, almost illegible. A knock on the door startles him, and he looks up to see Lucas standing there, his eyes hollow, dark circles beneath them. I saw you, Lucas whispers, his voice barely audible. In the forest, Viktor's blood runs cold. He hadn't shared his dream with anyone, yet Lucas's words cut through him like a blade. As the session begins, Lucas slips into one of his alternate personalities, a soldier named Tobias from World War II. Tobias speaks of a battle at dusk, of watching his comrades fall one by one, their faces twisted in terror. But it wasn't the enemy, Tobias says, his voice trembling. It was it, the witness. It followed us through the trenches, watching, waiting, and then it chose. Viktor leans forward, goosebumps rising on his arms as Tobias continues. I tried to run, but the air froze around me. The sky turned red, and the whispers. Oh God, the whispers. Tobias suddenly stops mid-sentence. His head jerks violently to the side, and his voice changes again, becoming deep and guttural, just as it had on the tape. You cannot escape, the voice snarls, and the room's temperature plummets. The lights flicker, and Viktor feels an overwhelming sense of being watched. Lucas begins to convulse, his eyes rolling back as he mutters unintelligible words. Viktor rushes to his side, calling for help, but just as suddenly as it began, Lucas goes still. His eyes flutter open, and in his normal voice he whispers, "It's coming for you." Viktor's hands tremble as he writes his session notes that evening. He tries to focus, but the words on the page blur, and he feels a weight pressing down on him, like an invisible presence looming over his shoulder. When he looks up at the reflection in the darkened window, he swears he sees a figure standing behind him, just for an instant, before it vanishes into the shadows. The next session begins with an unnatural silence in the room. The usual hum of the air conditioning and distant murmurs of the Institute's hallways seem muted, as if the world itself is holding its breath. Dr. Viktor Lacerda sits across from Lucas, whose gaze is fixed on the floor, his body rigid. Something feels wrong, an oppressive weight pressing down on both men. Viktor breaks the silence with a soft, measured tone, but before he can finish his question, Lucas raises his head abruptly, his face pale and his eyes glassy. "It's closer now," Lucas murmurs. His voice is distant, as though it's being pulled from somewhere far away. Viktor watches as Lucas begins to draw on the paper in front of him, his movements frantic and almost mechanical. The pen scratches violently across the page, filling it with jagged lines and spirals that seem to form the outline of a face. As the sketch comes into focus, Viktor's breath hitches. The face is eerily familiar. It's the same faceless figure from his dreams. The black, hollow void where the eyes should be feels as though it's staring directly at him. "Lucas, what is this?" Viktor asks, his voice trembling slightly. Lucas doesn't respond. Instead, he mutters under his breath, words that Viktor can barely decipher. He leans closer, straining to catch the whispered fragments. "It's always watching, always waiting, we're not alone." The temperature in the room drops suddenly, and Viktor notices his breath fogging in the cold air. The fluorescent lights above flicker erratically, casting unsettling shadows that seem to stretch and crawl along the walls. Then, Lucas abruptly slams his hand down on the table, startling Viktor. "You hear it, don't you?" Lucas demands, his voice now deeper, almost unrecognizable. Viktor shakes his head, but in truth, he has started to notice something. It begins as a faint hum, low and resonant, like the sound of a distant tuning fork. It grows steadily louder, morphing into whispers, indistinct yet unnervingly clear in intent. The whispers seem to come from all around the room, seeping from the cracks in the walls, the corners of the ceiling, and even from the depths of Lucas's voice. Viktor's chest tightens as he realizes the whispers aren't just noise. They're words, and they're calling his name. Suddenly, Lucas begins to speak, but not as himself. His voice shifts, adopting the tone and accent of a woman from a different era. "They burned me alive," Lucas says, his gaze locking onto Viktor with unsettling intensity. The witness was there, watching as the flames consumed me. It whispered promises of escape, but they were lies. It always lies. Lucas's body convulses slightly, his head snapping back as his voice shifts again, this time to that of a child. "It followed me into the woods. I thought I could hide, but it always finds you. Always." The air in the room grows heavier, suffocating. Viktor feels an overwhelming sense of dread creeping over him, like icy fingers crawling up his spine. He glances at the clock on the wall, but the second hand has stopped moving, frozen in place. Time itself seems to be warping around them. He fights to keep his composure, but his trembling hands betray him. Lucas's voice deepens once more, becoming guttural and inhuman. "You're part of it now," the voice growls, each word vibrating through the air like the toll of a distant bell. Viktor's mind races, trying to process what's happening, but his thoughts are interrupted by a sharp sound, a knock loud and deliberate, echoing through the office. He turns to the door, but no one is there. The knocking continues, each thud heavier than the last, as if something is trying to break through. Desperate to regain control, Viktor ends the session abruptly. Lucas slumps back in his chair, unconscious, as if drained of all energy. Viktor leans back, his heart pounding in his chest, his shirt damp with sweat despite the frigid air. He presses the intercom button, calling for assistance, but there's no response. The line crackles with static before falling silent. As Viktor moves to leave the room, his eyes are drawn to the window. Outside, the storm rages, rain hammering against the glass. But amidst the swirling darkness, he sees it, the outline of a figure standing motionless in the courtyard below. Its elongated form is shrouded in shadows, but Viktor knows without a doubt, it's the witness. It tilts its head slowly, as if acknowledging him, before vanishing into the storm. Viktor stumbles back, his mind teetering on the edge of panic. He realizes this isn't just about Lucas anymore. The whispers, the dreams, the visions, whatever this thing is, it has set its sights on him. Dr. Viktor Lacerda's nights become plagued by vivid, haunting dreams that feel more real than waking life. He finds himself standing in places he's never been, reliving lives that aren't his own. One particular dream begins with him walking through a trench in the dead of night. The air is thick with the stench of mud, blood, and smoke, and the distant sound of gunfire echoes in his ears. He stumbles, his legs heavy as though they're weighed down by something unseen. He isn't himself in this dream. He is Tobias, the soldier Lucas described in their sessions. Every sound, every texture is painfully real. The trench is eerily quiet, save for the crunch of his boots against the dirt. Viktor hears whispers again, faint and taunting, coming from the darkness ahead. They grow louder, turning into a cacophony of voices. He turns a corner, and there it is, the witness. The figure stands impossibly still, its form cloaked in shadows that seem to writhe and shift unnaturally. Its eyeless face feels like it's staring directly into Viktor's soul. He tries to move, but his body won't respond. The whispers crescendo, overlapping in a symphony of dread, each voice repeating the same chilling word, witness. Suddenly, Viktor wakes up, gasping for air, drenched in sweat. But something is wrong. The room is not as he left it. On the nightstand lies a small, rusted dog tag with the name Tobias etched into the metal. Mud stains trail from his bed to the door, as if someone, or something, walked through his room during the night. His breath quickens, and a sense of dread washes over him. Was this a dream, or did he truly leave his room? The next day, Viktor confronts Lucas, demanding answers. Lucas appears gaunt, his skin pale and clammy. "It's not a dream," Lucas whispers, his voice hoarse. "It's showing you. It's bringing you closer." Viktor tries to dismiss this as delusion, but the evidence is undeniable. He finds himself haunted during waking hours, fleeting glimpses of the figure in reflective surfaces, a lingering shadow in the corner of his vision, and the whispers, always the whispers. That night, Viktor's nightmare continues, but this time it is far worse. He is no longer Tobias, but the medieval woman burned at the stake. He feels the searing heat of the flames licking at his skin, the acrid smoke filling his lungs. Around him, a jeering crowd screams, their faces distorted into grotesque masks of hatred. Above the din, he hears the voice of the witness, calm and unyielding. "You cannot run from what you've become," it says. Viktor tries to scream, but the smoke chokes his voice. He looks up, and there, at the edge of the crowd, stands the shadowy figure, watching silently. When Viktor wakes, he's trembling uncontrollably. His wrists ache, and he finds red, raw marks around them, exactly where the ropes had bound him in the dream. He rushes to the bathroom, splashing water on his face, only to freeze when he looks in the mirror. For a brief second, his reflection isn't his own. It's the face of the medieval woman, her eyes wide with terror. He stumbles back, the glass shattering as he grips the sink for support. Desperate for answers, Viktor revisits the recordings of his sessions with Lucas. He notices something he missed before, faint whispers in the background, almost inaudible. He amplifies the sound, his heart racing as he deciphers the words, "Join us. Witness. Join us." The whispers are not Lucas's voice. They are deeper, otherworldly, and layered with malice. Viktor's hands tremble as he realizes the whispers are speaking directly to him. The climax hits its peak when Viktor finds himself unable to distinguish dream from reality. One night, he awakens, or thinks he does, to find his room bathed in an unnatural red glow. The walls are covered in words scrawled in blood. Witness. 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 The air feels thick, suffocating, and he hears the sound of footsteps slowly approaching. He turns toward the door, which creaks open to reveal the witness, its form now clearer and more menacing than ever. Viktor tries to move, but his body is paralyzed. The figure steps closer, its elongated fingers reaching out. "You are one of us now," it says in a voice that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere. As its hand touches Viktor's chest, he feels an unbearable cold that spreads through his body, as though his very soul is being siphoned away. He wakes with a start, but the red glow lingers in the room for a moment before fading. On the floor beside his bed, he finds a charred piece of rope and a burned scrap of parchment with the words, "You are next." Viktor realizes the terrifying truth. This is no longer about saving Lucas. The entity has chosen him, and there may be no escape. Dr. Viktor Lacerda is no longer certain where the boundaries between dream and reality lie. Each night, he descends further into horrifying visions of other lives, each more vivid than the last. But it's not just the dreams anymore. What happens in his mind is beginning to manifest in the real world. One morning, Viktor wakes to find scratches along his arms, as though clawed by something unseen. The marks match wounds he remembers from his nightmare of being Tobias in the trenches. Beside his bed is a damp, rusted canteen, engraved with initials he recognizes from Lucas's session notes. Viktor begins to piece together the impossible. The objects and injuries from his dreams are crossing into his reality. Worse yet, he realizes that these items have historical significance, corresponding to records of people who disappeared in unexplained circumstances, just like the personalities Lucas embodies. Driven by terror and a desperate need for answers, Viktor dives into research, pulling old archives and forgotten records. He discovers that each of Lucas's personalities matches a documented case of a person who vanished, their last recorded words eerily similar. They spoke of a shadowed figure watching them, whispering their name. Viktor's heart pounds as he notes the disturbing consistency of the reports. Some span decades, others centuries, yet all share one horrifying detail: the witness was there. In his darkest moment of realization, Viktor uncovers something even more chilling. Each disappearance occurs in cycles, a timeline of victims that connects to the witness. The dates form a perfect sequence, and the next in line is only days away. The realization slams into Viktor like a freight train. Lucas is the next target. But as he stares at the timeline, another horrifying thought emerges. Viktor himself, now intertwined with Lucas's dreams, may also be part of this sinister pattern. During the next session, Viktor confronts Lucas with what he's found, his voice trembling as he speaks. "Lucas, these lives, these personalities, they're not fragments of your mind. They're real people, and they're connected to something ancient, something malevolent." Lucas, sitting hunched in his chair, slowly looks up, his face gaunt, and whispers, "It's not just them anymore. It's you too, Doctor." The words hit Viktor like a physical blow. Before he can respond, Lucas collapses into his chair, his body convulsing violently. Viktor rushes to his side, his hands trembling as he tries to stabilize his patient. But Lucas's eyes snap open, and they are not his own. They are black, endless voids that seem to pull Viktor in. Lucas's voice shifts, deep and guttural, yet layered with an eerie calm. "You thought you could study it, control it, but you were never the observer. You've always been part of the story." The air in the room grows thick, suffocating. The fluorescent lights dim, leaving the room bathed in an unnatural twilight. Viktor watches in horror as the shadows in the corners of the room begin to stretch and writhe, twisting into forms that resemble arms and hands. One shadow crawls up the wall, elongating until it forms the unmistakable shape of the witness, its hollow face tilted toward Viktor in a mockery of curiosity. Viktor staggers back, his body shaking as Lucas's voice continues, now layered with countless others, all speaking in unison. Each life, each memory, each soul, it all becomes part of the cycle. And now, Doctor, it's your turn. Unable to take it any longer, Viktor flees the room, leaving Lucas unconscious in his chair. He bursts into the hallway, his breath ragged and shallow. As he leans against the wall to steady himself, he notices something he hadn't before. The shadows in the corridor don't match the light sources. They flicker and stretch unnaturally, and in the faintest edges of the darkness, he can see shapes moving. Watching. Waiting. Viktor's resolve begins to crack as he returns to his office to review the session's recording, desperate to make sense of what's happening. But when he plays the tape, there's no audio, only static. As the video progresses, the static clears just enough to reveal a faint, blurry image of the witness standing directly behind him during the session. Viktor freezes, the realization hitting him like ice. It wasn't just Lucas being watched, it was him all along. Frantically, Viktor flips through his notes, his hands trembling as he pieces together the horrifying truth. The witness is not just a passive observer. It chooses its victims through their connection to others, and Viktor, in his obsession with Lucas's case, has become the next target. He tries to rationalize, to convince himself that there must be a scientific explanation. But deep down, he knows the truth. Whatever this entity is, it defies the laws of reality, and it has already begun to unravel his life. The scene ends with Viktor staring at his reflection in the cracked mirror of his office. His face looks hollow, his eyes sunken, but it's not his face alone that he sees. Standing just behind him, barely visible in the dim light, is the witness, its hollow visage tilted as if amused. When Viktor turns, there's nothing there, but the whisper remains, faint yet unmistakable, "Witness." Dr. Viktor Lacerda's descent into the unknown begins with a frantic search for answers. Every thread he pulls seems to unravel the world around him further, dragging him deeper into a reality where logic and reason no longer apply. The nights are the worst. The dreams, if they can still be called that, leave him waking in terror, clutching his chest, unable to breathe. Each time, the figure of the witness grows clearer, closer, and more malevolent. Viktor knows he is running out of time. Desperate, he turns to an old colleague, Dr. Emilia Vargas, a professor of folklore and ancient religions. Viktor hesitates before reaching out. What he's experiencing feels absurd, even to himself. But when Emilia answers his call, her voice carries an unnerving familiarity with his plight. "You've seen it, haven't you?" she asks before he can explain. Her words send a chill down his spine. Viktor arranges to meet her that evening at her isolated home, far from the city's lights and noise. When Viktor arrives, he finds Emilia's home cluttered with books, scrolls, and artifacts. Candles flicker along shelves, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Emilia ushers him into her study, where the air is thick with the smell of aged paper and incense. She listens as Viktor recounts Lucas's sessions, the dreams, and the escalating manifestations of the witness. Her face grows paler with each detail. "You're not dealing with a fragment of the psyche, Viktor," she says gravely. "This is something far older, far darker." Emilia reveals that the witness has been recorded in various forms throughout history, always as a silent observer of human suffering and trauma. It doesn't just watch, she explains. It collects memories, souls, fragments of reality itself. Those it chooses are marked, pulled into its cycle. And once you're marked, there's no going back. Viktor's stomach churns as Emilia places a faded illustration before him. A figure cloaked in shadows, featureless yet somehow exuding an overwhelming sense of dread. The caption beneath reads, "Testis Eternus, the Eternal Witness." As Emilia speaks, the house grows unnaturally cold. The flames of the candles flicker wildly, casting grotesque shapes that seem to writhe and twist along the walls. Viktor feels the now familiar weight of an unseen presence pressing down on him. "It's here, isn't it?" he whispers, his voice barely audible. Emilia nods solemnly. "It knows you're trying to stop it." Before they can continue, the lights in the room dim, plunging them into near darkness. The shadows stretch and merge, forming an oppressive black void in the corner of the room. Viktor's pulse quickens as he sees movement within the void, a flicker of something long and skeletal. Emilia chants something under her breath, clutching a small talisman, but Viktor can't take his eyes off the figure emerging from the darkness. It's the witness. It doesn't move, it doesn't need to. Its presence alone fills the room with an unbearable sense of dread, as though the walls themselves are closing in. Viktor stumbles back, his breath ragged, as the entity's hollow gaze locks onto him. For a brief moment, he feels his mind being pulled somewhere else, a swirling vortex of memories that aren't his own. A medieval village in flames, a soldier's dying breath, a child crying out in the woods. He feels their pain, their fear, their final moments. When he snaps back to reality, Emilia is shaking him, her face pale and stricken. "It's marked you completely now," she says. "You're part of its cycle." Determined not to give in, Viktor begs Emilia for a way to break the entity's hold. She hesitates, her hands trembling as she flips through an ancient tome. "There's only one way," she says at last. "You have to confront it where its power is strongest. The place where it began." Viktor's blood runs cold as she points to an old map, the coordinates leading to a remote forest far from civilization. The same forest he's seen in his dreams. Viktor knows the journey will be perilous, but he has no choice. As he prepares to leave, Emilia warns him, "The closer you get, the more it will try to stop you. And once you face it, you may not come back." That night, Viktor dreams again. This time, the forest is clearer than ever, its twisted trees towering above him, their branches forming a canopy that blocks out the sky. The whispers surround him, louder and more distinct, each voice begging, crying, or warning. In the distance, he sees the faint glow of a fire and the outline of the witness. It doesn't move, but Viktor feels its presence pressing against his very soul. He wakes just as the whispers crescendo into a deafening scream. As Viktor packs his belongings, his hands tremble not just with fear, but with the weight of what lies ahead. He knows that confronting the witness may mean sacrificing everything, his mind, his body, even his soul. But he also knows that to do nothing would mean condemning himself and Lucas to an eternity of torment. Dr. Viktor Lacerda stands at the edge of the cursed forest, clutching a flashlight in one trembling hand and Emilia's talisman in the other. The air is heavy with moisture, carrying the scent of decay and earth. The trees seem alive, their gnarled branches twisting like skeletal hands reaching for him. The silence is oppressive, broken only by the crunch of leaves beneath his boots. He feels the weight of the witness before he even sees it, an overwhelming sense of being watched, of being judged. As Viktor ventures deeper, the forest becomes unnaturally dark, the canopy above blotting out even the faintest glimmers of moonlight. His flashlight flickers erratically, casting fleeting shadows that seem to shift and move on their own. The whispers begin again, faint at first, like the distant hum of wind through the trees. But they grow louder, sharper, and more distinct. They are voices, hundreds, maybe thousands, crying out in fear, anger, and agony. Viktor presses on, his breath shallow, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. He stumbles upon a clearing, and there it is, the heart of the nightmare. A massive, ancient tree looms in the center, its trunk blackened and charred as though it had been struck by lightning centuries ago. Its roots twist and coil into the ground, forming unnatural shapes that almost resemble human forms. The whispers reach a deafening crescendo, and Viktor drops to his knees, clutching his head as the voices pour into his mind. Then the whispers stop. The silence is more terrifying than the noise. Viktor looks up and sees the witness standing before the tree. It is no longer just a shadow. Its form is clearer now, yet still impossible to fully comprehend. Its body is long and skeletal, cloaked in an ever-shifting darkness that seems to absorb the light around it. Its face, or the lack thereof, is a blank void, yet Viktor feels its gaze piercing into him, seeing every fear, every regret, every moment of weakness. "You've come to understand," the witness says, its voice echoing inside Viktor's head. It is not one voice, but many, a chorus of the lost, the broken, the damned. "You are not here to stop me. You are here because you are mine." Viktor's legs tremble as he rises to his feet, the talisman burning hot in his hand. "I'm here to end this," he says, though his voice wavers. He steps closer to the tree, feeling the weight of the countless souls bound to it. Their faces begin to appear in the twisted bark, Lucas's personalities, the victims from his dreams, and others he doesn't recognize. They stare at him with hollow, pleading eyes. The witness tilts its head as if amused. "End it? There is no end. There is only the cycle. You will join them, just as the others have." The shadows around the witness begin to move, extending toward Viktor like black tendrils. He stumbles back, raising the talisman, which glows faintly in defiance. The tendrils recoil, but only for a moment. Suddenly, Viktor hears a voice, Emilia's voice, echoing in his mind. The tree is its anchor. Destroy it, and you sever its connection to this world. Viktor's gaze shifts to the ancient tree, and he realizes what he must do. He rushes toward the tree, dodging the writhing shadows that lash out at him like whips. Each step feels heavier than the last, as though the ground itself is trying to pull him under. As Viktor reaches the base of the tree, the air around him grows suffocating. The faces in the bark scream silently, their mouths opening wide but producing no sound. He raises the talisman high, its glow intensifying. The witness lets out a soundless roar, its form expanding and shifting violently. "You cannot break what has always been," it bellows, the voices merging into a single, ear-splitting cry. With every ounce of strength he has left, Viktor slams the talisman into the tree. A blinding light erupts from the point of contact, and the forest itself seems to scream. The faces in the bark writhe and contort before fading into nothingness. The shadows retreat, and the witness lets out one final, echoing cry as its form dissolves into the darkness. When the light fades, Viktor collapses to the ground, the talisman now a charred, lifeless husk in his hand. The forest is silent again, but it is a different kind of silence, peaceful, not oppressive. The tree stands as a blackened husk, its roots lifeless and still. Viktor's victory is short-lived. As he stumbles out of the forest, the whispers return, faint and distant but unmistakable. He realizes that while he may have severed the witness's anchor, its essence still lingers, watching, waiting for another chance to complete the cycle. He reaches his car, exhausted and broken, and catches his reflection in the rearview mirror. For a moment, his face isn't his own, it's blank, featureless, and hollow, just like the witness. He blinks, and the image is gone, but the message is clear, the nightmare isn't over. Dr. Viktor Lacerda drives away from the cursed forest, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles are pale. The night feels unnaturally quiet, the only sound the hum of the car's engine as it cuts through the endless dark road. Though he's left the tree and the witness behind, the oppressive sense of being watched hasn't faded. The air in the car feels heavy, and every now and then, he catches faint whispers in the back of his mind, like the dying embers of a fire refusing to go out. As he reaches the outskirts of the city, Viktor pulls over at a gas station, desperate for a moment to collect himself. The fluorescent lights above the pumps flicker erratically, casting unsettling shadows across the pavement. He steps out of the car, the cold night air biting at his skin, but something feels wrong. The station is eerily empty, no attendants, no customers, not even the faint sound of music from the overhead speakers. The only sound is the faint rustling of the wind and the creak of the swaying sign above. Viktor approaches the door to the convenience store, his every step echoing unnaturally loud. As he pushes the door open, a small bell jingles, breaking the oppressive silence. Inside, the shelves are stocked, the lights are on, but the store is deserted. His breath fogs in the air, despite the faint hum of a heater somewhere. As he moves through the aisles, he feels it again, that same weight, that same sense of being observed. He stops, his body frozen as a faint whisper snakes its way into his ear, "Witness." His heart pounds as he spins around, expecting to see the faceless figure of the witness, but there's nothing there. The store is empty, yet the feeling of being watched intensifies. On the counter, a small television flickers to life, displaying static. Slowly, an image forms on the screen, a black and white view of the forest clearing, the ancient tree now nothing more than a charred husk. As Viktor stares, the screen zooms in on the tree's bark. Faces begin to emerge from the grain of the wood, their hollow eyes staring back at him. Suddenly, the screen cuts to black, and a reflection appears in its darkened surface, Viktor's face, but it's not entirely his. For a brief second, his features blur, replaced by the hollow void of the witness. He stumbles back, his breathing ragged, as the television shuts off with a crackle. Rushing out of the store, Viktor gets back into his car, his hands trembling as he turns the ignition. The engine sputters but doesn't start. The lights of the gas station flicker again, this time extinguishing entirely, plunging the area into darkness. Viktor fumbles for his flashlight, but before he can turn it on, he hears the unmistakable sound of footsteps on gravel, slow, deliberate, and getting closer. He turns, shining the flashlight into the night, but the beam only reveals the empty lot around him. The footsteps stop, but the air grows colder, and the whispers return, louder this time. They swirl around him, overlapping, incomprehensible yet filled with malice. Viktor grips the talisman Amelia gave him, but it feels cold and lifeless in his hand now, as if its power has been drained. Then he sees it. Just at the edge of the darkness, a figure stands, its silhouette motionless but unmistakable. The witness has returned, or perhaps it never truly left. Viktor locks eyes with the faceless void, and for a moment he feels everything. The despair of the souls trapped in the cycle, the weight of countless lives lost, and his own inevitable fate. The whispers grow deafening, and the figure begins to move toward him, slow but relentless. In a panic, Viktor slams his fists against the steering wheel, screaming at the car to start. The engine roars to life, and he tears out of the lot, gravel flying in his wake. As he speeds down the road, the whispers fade, but the sense of dread lingers. He checks the rearview mirror, expecting to see the witness standing in the road, but there's nothing there. Yet he can't shake the feeling that it's still with him, hidden just beyond the edge of his vision. Viktor finally reaches his apartment at dawn, the first rays of sunlight casting long shadows through the streets. He locks the door behind him, pulling the curtains shut and collapsing onto the couch. For a moment, the silence feels almost comforting. He closes his eyes, hoping for just a few minutes of peace. But when he opens them again, he's no longer in his apartment. He's back in the forest clearing, standing before the charred remains of the tree. The sky above is blood red, and the whispers are deafening. Viktor spins around, desperate to escape, but the forest stretches endlessly in every direction. He realizes with a sinking dread that he never left. The forest isn't just a place, it's a part of him now. Is it possible to escape something that has already claimed you? What happens when the line between reality and nightmare disappears entirely? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe, because some stories never truly end.